Carl Jung, a pioneer in analytical psychology, once said, "In silence, we discover who we are." This gentle assertion captures a profound truth about the human experience, that strength is not always expressed through action, speech, or assertion, but often through restraint, reflection, and inner stillness. For Jung, silence wasn't emptiness, it was a fertile ground for transformation. When we learn to be silent, not just in sound, but in judgment, reaction, and ego, we begin to cultivate a deeper awareness of ourselves and others. In this quietude, our fears surface, our shadows speak, and slowly we learn to face them. Strength, then, becomes not the roar of certainty, but the whisper of patience. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in symbols, dreams, and silence, languages that require stillness to understand, to sit with our own discomfort, to hear the unsaid, and to resist the need to fill the void with noise. This is a practice of immense courage. Silence teaches us how to hold space, how to endure ambiguity, and how to become whole. In a world obsessed with speaking and reacting, learning silence is not retreat, it is revelation. It is the discipline of listening to the soul's quiet voice and finding there the strongest part of ourselves. Dear everyone, before we continue the program, if you enjoy this topic, please comment number 1. If you'd like me to create more similar content, comment number 2. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any useful videos. Thank you, and wish you all meaningful moments. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the noise of the world? The endless opinions, the need to respond, the expectation to have it all figured out all the time? What happens when you're surrounded by people but still feel completely unheard? Or when your own thoughts grow so loud that they drown out your inner peace? In moments like these, we often search for answers outside of ourselves, through distraction, validation, or constant motion. But what if the answer is not out there at all? What if instead it lies in a space we've come to fear or ignore? Silence. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, believed deeply in the wisdom that arises from within. He proposed that silence is not an absence, but a presence, a sacred space where the psyche begins to speak. To Jung, silence was not a void to escape from, but a mirror reflecting the parts of ourselves we seldom face. In a world dominated by external noise and pressure, Jung's insight stands like a quiet lighthouse. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us. That inner voice, often muffled by daily chaos, can only be heard when we stop speaking, stop rushing, stop performing. What if learning silence was the key to finding your true strength? Not the kind of strength measured by success or social validation, but the kind that arises from being at peace with your deepest self. The kind that allows you to move through life with grounded presence, self-awareness, and quiet power. In this video, we'll explore Carl Jung's timeless perspective on silence, why he saw it as a gateway to individuation, the process of becoming whole. We'll examine what it means to embrace quiet, not as a weakness, but as a radical form of inner strength. And we'll journey through 8 stages of reflection, insight, and transformation together. So take a deep breath, set aside the world's noise for a while, and join us as we unfold the profound truth Jung left behind. Learning silence is learning strength. 1. The noise outside and within. Why we fear silence. In the modern world, silence is often treated like an awkward pause, something to be filled, escaped, or ignored. Think about it. When was the last time you sat in complete silence without reaching for your phone, turning on music, or scrolling endlessly? We live in a society that equates silence with emptiness, and in doing so, we've learned to fear it. But Carl Jung saw something entirely different. To him, silence was not absence, it was substance. It was the moment where the unconscious could begin to speak. He wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." That awakening, however, requires stillness, and stillness demands courage, because when we quiet the external world, what remains is the internal one, and that world, our inner world, isn't always easy to face. The addictive nature of noise. Let's first understand why we fear silence. It's not just a passive discomfort, it's often a survival strategy. We're conditioned to seek stimulation. From a young age, we're taught that productivity equals worth, that opinions equal presence, and that being on all the time is the same as being alive. Social media thrives on noise. Advertisements scream for our attention. Even our homes are often filled with background sound. Noise gives us a sense of control. It keeps us distracted from the parts of ourselves we haven't yet made peace with, our insecurities, regrets, questions, and shadows. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to meet the expectations of society. And like any mask, it's fragile. Silence threatens the persona because it strips away the performance and leaves us face to face with the self. What emerges in the quiet, when we remove the distractions and sit in silence, something strange happens. At first, there's restlessness, then maybe boredom. But slowly, thoughts bubble up. Thoughts that were always there but pushed to the edges of awareness. Maybe it's unresolved grief. Maybe it's an old memory you thought you forgot. Maybe it's the realization that you've been living a version of your life that doesn't align with who you truly are. This is what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious part of our psyche that holds all we've rejected or disowned. Silence becomes a gateway to the shadow, not to frighten us, but to help us reclaim what we've left behind. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. To face the unconscious, to hear its voice, we must learn to be still, to sit in that sacred discomfort and listen without running away. Our cultural resistance to stillness. In today's culture, silence is often pathologized. If someone withdraws, they are seen as antisocial. If they don't respond immediately, they're considered rude or disengaged. Meditation and solitude are often misunderstood as escapism or laziness. But Jung knew otherwise. He believed the soul needed solitude to grow. Silence was the inner sanctum where transformation begins, not as an escape from life, but as a deeper entry into it. Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living. What would happen if we no longer saw silence as something to fear, but something to embrace? What if we chose, deliberately, to turn off the external noise and face what lies beneath? We might discover truths we've been avoiding. We might find pain, but also healing. We might meet our authentic self for the first time in a long while. And in that meeting, there is strength. Not the kind of strength that postures or performs, but the quiet kind, the rooted kind, that doesn't need to prove itself to the world. The beginning of a journey inward. This is where our journey truly begins, because once we understand why we fear silence, we can begin to see its purpose. Silence is the threshold. Beyond it lies the unconscious, the shadow, the soul, and the wisdom they carry. But it all begins with a choice, to stop running and to start listening. In the next section, we'll step into this space more deliberately. We'll explore how silence becomes a mirror, reflecting not just what's hidden, but also what's possible. And we'll begin to understand why Jung believed that silence wasn't just a tool for healing, but the very essence of personal strength. Take a breath, let it out slowly. And remember, silence is not empty. It's full of the things we most need to hear. 2. Silence as a mirror, meeting the shadow self. When the noise fades and silence settles in, something unexpected begins to happen. We begin to see, not the world around us, but the world within. Carl Jung described this moment as a crossing point, a threshold into the unconscious. It's not dramatic or loud. In fact, it's often unsettling in its stillness. But the silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, something stirs, the shadow. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. Carl Jung. What is the shadow? In Jungian psychology, the shadow represents the parts of ourselves we suppress, deny, or disown. It's everything that doesn't fit the image we present to the world. Our envy, our rage, our hidden fears, but also our unlit potential, our boldness, our passion, our creativity. The shadow isn't evil, it's simply unacknowledged. It develops as we grow up and learn what's acceptable and what's not. So we tuck away the parts of ourselves that don't win approval. We forget them. But they don't forget us. They speak through dreams, projections, outbursts, and patterns we can't quite explain. And the only way to truly face them is through silence. Silence as reflection. Imagine sitting in a quiet room with no distractions. At first, your mind races, task lists, conversations, worries. But then, something deeper begins to emerge. You remember a moment you felt ashamed. You recall a time you hurt someone and never made it right. You feel the ache of longing or the sting of regret. These aren't random thoughts. They're echoes from the shadow. In everyday life, we rarely give these echoes a voice. But in silence, they rise to the surface, asking not to be judged, but acknowledged. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Jung reminds us, enlightenment is not about escaping darkness. It's about embracing it. Projection and self-deception. When we avoid silence, we often avoid self-examination. And instead of confronting our shadow, we project it onto others. Have you ever been irritated by someone's arrogance, only to later realize it mirrored a pride you hadn't dealt with in yourself? Have you judged someone's vulnerability, only to realize it touched something tender in you? This is projection, our shadow seen in others. Silence disrupts projection. It forces us to look inward instead of outward, to own what we see rather than blame it on the world. This isn't easy, but it is freeing. When we meet our shadow with honesty, it loses its power to control us from the dark. Integration, not elimination. Jung never advocated for defeating the shadow. His goal was integration, bringing the shadow into conscious awareness so it becomes part of the whole self. I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole. Strength doesn't come from pretending we are always kind, always wise, always good. It comes from recognizing that we are complex, capable of both hurt and healing, fear and courage, destruction and creation. The silence allows us to hold that complexity without collapsing. It teaches us that we don't need to run from the parts of ourselves that feel broken. We only need to witness them with compassion. Inner strength through honesty. True strength, Jung would argue, is not built through domination or certainty. It's built through honest self-knowledge, and that begins with quiet. In silence, we learn the subtle language of the psyche. We begin to notice the patterns of our thoughts, the tone of our inner voice, the emotions beneath our reactions. We begin to see how much of what we believe about ourselves is just conditioning, and how much power we have when we begin to rewrite those beliefs, not by force, but by awareness. This is inner alchemy, not the kind that turns metal into gold, but the kind that turns wounds into wisdom. And it starts with stillness, silence, the sacred mirror. Silence is not just a tool for reflection, it is sacred space. A mirror that shows us the parts of ourselves no one else sees. A guide that whispers truths only the soul can hear. In Jung's view, the path to wholeness is not a path away from darkness, but through it. The more we face what we've denied, the more we recover what we've lost. And in that recovery, we become strong. Not because we are perfect, but because we are real. So the next time you find yourself in silence, notice what arises, not with fear, but with curiosity. Because what you meet there may be the very part of you that's been waiting to come home. 3. Individuation and the inner path to wholeness. Once we begin listening to the silence and meeting our shadow, a new question emerges. What now? What do we do with these revelations, the hidden emotions, long forgotten dreams, uncomfortable truths? Where does this inner journey take us? Carl Jung called this process individuation. It is not about becoming someone new, but about becoming who you already are, beneath the conditioning, the ego, and the mask. Individuation means becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost last and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. And here lies a paradox. This journey inward, the most personal, intimate path, is also the most universal. We all long to be whole. We all seek that inner alignment where our thoughts, actions, and values move in harmony. But most of us are taught to look outward for identity. Jung invites us to do something radical, to retreat into silence and listen for who we truly are. Beyond the ego, letting go of the persona. To understand individuation, we must first understand the difference between the persona and the self. The persona is the mask we wear to navigate society. It's our public face, carefully crafted, often necessary. But it's not the full story. The self, in Jungian terms, is the totality of who we are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, intellect and intuition. It is our deepest truth, beyond labels or roles. Individuation is the process of moving from identification with the persona to alignment with the self. Silence becomes essential here, because only in silence can we begin to hear the self whispering beneath the surface. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that becoming is not loud or grandiose. It is subtle. Interior, transformational, the role of silence in inner integration. Why does Jung place so much importance on inner listening? Because individuation cannot be taught. It cannot be imposed from outside. It arises naturally when we allow the psyche to unfold in its own rhythm. Silence provides the space for that unfolding. In silence, we stop performing. We stop pleasing, controlling, resisting. And in that spacious stillness, the many parts of ourselves, often fragmented and isolated, begin to speak to each other. We begin to feel more like a whole person, rather than a series of roles: the parent, the achiever, the friend, the rebel, the wounded child. We stop identifying with a single version of self and start embracing the totality. That is strength, not because it makes us invulnerable, but because it makes us authentic. Finding your inner compass. As individuation unfolds, another shift occurs. We no longer seek constant validation from the world. We begin to trust something deeper, a kind of inner compass. Jung believed that the self knows the way, that there is a kind of psychic center, like the sun at the center of the solar system, that gently pulls all the scattered parts of our psyche into harmony. But to feel that pull, we must quiet the static of the outside world. We must learn to wait in the stillness, to listen without demanding, to trust without controlling. Silence becomes a teacher, a sacred space of alignment. Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. From fragmentation to wholeness. In a culture obsessed with speed, comparison, and instant gratification, wholeness seems like a distant fantasy. But wholeness is not perfection. It is integrity, inner congruence. It means we are no longer betraying parts of ourselves to fit in. We are no longer living only in our heads or only in our wounds. We are moving from fragmentation to coherence. This transformation cannot be forced. It happens slowly, quietly, like dawn breaking after a long night. But its power is immense. You begin to feel centered even in chaos. You begin to act from clarity, not compulsion. You begin to speak less, but say more. You no longer fear being alone because you've met your own company. And it is enough. Silence as sacred space for becoming individuation is not a destination. It is a lifelong journey. But every step is sacred, and every moment of silence is an invitation to take that next step inward. When you choose silence, not as avoidance, but as presence, you choose healing, you choose truth, you choose growth. This is why Jung's work remains so powerful, even today. Because in a world that pushes us to do more, say more, be more, Jung gently reminds us, be still, listen, you already are. 4. The quiet warrior. Expressing strength without noise. When we think of strength, we often imagine something loud, forceful, or outwardly impressive. We picture warriors who conquer, speakers who persuade, leaders who command. But Jung offered a different image, one not of dominance, but of depth. A quiet warrior. Someone who moves through life with a grounded presence. Someone who listens more than they speak and acts from their center, not their ego. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, Carl Jung. And that is where true strength lies. Not in defeating others, but in facing oneself with honesty and compassion. Not in noise, but in silence that steadies and strengthens. Let's explore how this quiet strength shows up in daily life and why it is more powerful than we often realize. Inner control versus outer control. Many people confuse strength with control. We try to control situations, people, or outcomes in order to feel safe. But this kind of strength is fragile. It depends on the world cooperating. Jungian strength doesn't work this way. It arises from inner control, mastery of our thoughts, awareness of our reactions, discipline in our speech, compassion in our silence. When you learn to hold your center in the face of chaos, you don't need to overpower anything. You simply remain unshaken. Silence becomes a posture of dignity. You no longer rush to defend your image, prove your point, or fill the void. You realize what is true doesn't need to shout. Silence in conflict, the power of restraint. Think of a time you were in conflict. A conversation escalated. Words were exchanged. Emotions ran high. Now imagine what might have happened if one person had paused, breathed, refused to retaliate with the same intensity. That pause, that silence is not weakness, it is power. Jung believed that emotional maturity meant owning your responses instead of projecting them. It means choosing reflection over reaction. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. In conflict, The quiet warrior doesn't suppress, they observe. They speak only when their words carry clarity, not chaos. They know that silence isn't passive. It's a space where truth can ripen before being spoken. This is not about silence as avoidance. It's about silence as discernment. You don't speak to defend your ego. You speak to serve understanding. And sometimes not speaking is the most loving thing you can do for others and for yourself. Decision-making through silence. In an age of constant pressure to act, reply, and choose, silence is revolutionary. It gives you back your inner authority. Jung emphasized the importance of listening to the inner voice, that deeper knowing which often gets drowned out by external noise. When you face a decision and sit with it in silence, you allow your intuition to emerge. Not as superstition, but as wisdom formed by your unconscious mind. You start to notice which choices bring peace, which ones stir anxiety, what part of you wants to rush, and what part of you wants to wait. In this still space, answers come, not from logic alone, but from the integration of your whole being. Solitude is not given to us only to rest in. It is there to teach us how to work upon ourselves. And in that work, clarity arises. You act, not because you're forced to, but because it feels true. Relationships rooted in presence. Silent strength also transforms how we relate to others. When we are secure in ourselves, we no longer need to dominate conversations or seek constant reassurance. We can simply be present. In relationships, this presence is everything. It allows space for the other person to be who they are. It opens the door to deeper connection, not built on performance, but authenticity. We begin to listen, not to reply, but to understand. We offer silence, not as disinterest, but as honoring the sacred space between words. And in that space, something rare unfolds: trust, intimacy, respect. Jung believed that true connection starts when we meet others from the self, not the persona. When we no longer need to impress or protect, we become safe people, rooted, calm, unshakable, becoming the quiet warrior. This path is not always easy. The world may misunderstand your silence. It may mistake it for withdrawal or indifference. But inside you will know you are standing in your power. The quiet warrior is not perfect but present, not passive but patient, not silent to disappear, but silent to listen, learn, and lead from within. And in this quiet strength, there is something unbreakable. Only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. Life is not either noise or silence, it is both. But silence gives depth to sound, just as stillness gives meaning to movement. When you embrace the quiet within, you don't lose your voice, you find its true resonance. 5. Dreams, symbols, and the silent language of the soul. When the world grows quiet and the mind releases its grip on control, a deeper layer of reality begins to speak. Not in words, but in images. Not in facts, but in symbols. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to exploring this hidden terrain, the realm of dreams, archetypes, and the unconscious. He believed that our dreams are not meaningless hallucinations, but profound messages from the soul. The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul, Carl Jung. And through silence, we find the key to that door. Because dreams do not speak in the language of logic or ego, they whisper in metaphors, they communicate through feeling, and they require a quiet, receptive mind to be heard at all. The dream is inner messenger. Every night, we enter a symbolic world crafted not by our conscious will, but by something older, deeper, wiser, the unconscious. In Jung's view, the unconscious is not a place of chaos or repression. It is a source of guidance, a reservoir of inner wisdom that rises to meet us through images and emotions while we sleep. When we dream of a house, a child, a forest, or a flood, the meaning is not fixed, but layered. It is personal, archetypal, and often mysterious. But if we are willing to be still and listen, the dream reveals what the waking mind often ignores: a fear we haven't faced, a desire we've buried, a direction we've resisted, a truth we've outgrown. These are not random dreams, they are soul language, and like any language, it takes attention and silence to understand. Archetypes, the universal and the personal. Jung discovered that many of our dreams feature recurring characters or themes that appear across cultures and time. He called these archetypes primordial images that live in the collective unconscious. The mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the hero, the shadow. These are not just fictional roles. They are inner patterns, psychic structures we all share. When we dream of flying, being chased, falling, or returning to childhood, we are touching these ancient patterns within ourselves. But the meaning of an archetype isn't given to us. It emerges slowly, like a message in a bottle from the depths of the psyche. Silence is essential for receiving it. If we rush to interpret, we miss the nuance. If we dismiss the dream, we silence the soul. But if we sit in quiet contemplation, something remarkable happens. The dream begins to speak back. The psyche is a self-regulating system that seeks balance. Dreams are the guiding words of the soul. Dream work as a spiritual practice. Many people think dream work is simply about decoding symbols, but for Jung, it was a form of spiritual dialogue. Just as prayer is to the divine, dream interpretation is to the unconscious, a way of saying, I'm listening, I'm open, show me what I need to know. This isn't about rigid analysis, it's about building a relationship with your inner world. Each dream becomes a mirror, each symbol, a riddle, each silent moment of reflection, a conversation with the deeper self. And slowly, this process becomes sacred. It reconnects us to intuition. It bridges the divide between the conscious and the unconscious. It deepens our capacity for self-trust, and it reminds us that we are more than we think. Dreams as emotional integration. Jung observed that the psyche uses dreams to restore balance. If you are too identified with success, you may dream of failure. If you repress anger, you may dream of fire or confrontation. If you ignore grief, you may dream of funerals or flooded rooms. These are not punishments. They are psychic corrections, gentle nudges from within. The unconscious is always seeking wholeness, and dreams are its way of pointing us toward it. When we reflect on our dreams in silence, we allow the symbols to unfold, not just mentally, but emotionally. We process what we've ignored. We feel what we've numbed. We begin to heal what we didn't even know was wounded. This is not the kind of healing that comes from doing more. It's the kind that comes from being still and listening deeply. Silence as the gateway to the mythic self. The more we explore this inner world, the more we realize that we are not merely isolated individuals. We are participants in a vast mythic journey woven into the fabric of the collective human soul. Our struggles, our dreams, our breakthroughs, they are echoes of archetypal stories. The journey into the underworld, the death and rebirth, the return home, changed. Jung believed that when we connect with these stories through dreams and symbols, we awaken something ancient within us, something strong, something wise. But we cannot access that mythic depth through noise, speed, or surface-level thinking. We need silence, we need solitude, we need reverence. Because in silence, the mythic self rises, not as fantasy, but as truth waiting to be remembered. We must be able to let things happen in the psyche. For us, this is an art of which most people know nothing. Silence becomes the canvas. The soul paints in dreams, and you become the living artwork of your own becoming. 6. The dark night and the alchemy of inner silence. There are seasons in life when everything seems to fall away. The dreams we held on to collapse. The roles we identified with dissolve. Certainty vanishes, and all we're left with is silence. But not the peaceful kind, a silence that feels hollow, heavy, unrelenting. This is what mystics and depth psychologists alike call the dark night of the soul. And Carl Jung understood it not as a detour from the path, but as a necessary initiation into a deeper layer of being. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Carl Jung. These moments of existential silence, when nothing outside us can offer comfort, are not punishments. They are alchemical crucibles where something within us is dying, so something greater can be born. What is the dark night? The dark night isn't just about sadness or depression. It's about spiritual disorientation. It's when our old ways of understanding the world no longer work. When we question everything, our purpose, our identity, even our beliefs about life itself. In Jungian terms, this is the collapse of the persona. The mask we wore no longer fits, but the self has not yet fully emerged. It is an in-between, a psychic winter, and silence becomes both the landscape and the guide. This silence can feel brutal at first. The distractions that once dulled our pain no longer satisfy. Even words of encouragement can ring hollow. But underneath this despair, something is stirring. The alchemy has begun. Psychological alchemy, death and rebirth. Jung was deeply fascinated by alchemy, not as a literal attempt to turn lead into gold, but as a metaphor for inner transformation. He believed that the psyche undergoes its own alchemical processes: nigredo, the blackening, a dissolution of the known self; albedo, the whitening, the emergence of clarity; rubedo, the reddening, the full integration of selfhood. The dark night is the nigredo stage. We are being dismantled from the inside. But this dismantling is not destruction, it's preparation. Silence plays a sacred role here, because Ghost grip weakens. In silence, we stop clinging to the illusion of control, and slowly we begin to surrender, not in defeat, but in trust. We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the alchemy of silence. It holds space for our unmaking, so we may be remade. Why we must sit with it. In our culture, pain is something to be fixed. We want quick answers, fast solutions, immediate relief. But the psyche does not heal on command. True transformation cannot be rushed. It unfolds in its own rhythm, often slow, quiet, and imperceptible. This is why silence is so vital during dark nights, not as avoidance, but as witness. When we sit in silence with our suffering, without judgment, without rushing, we allow the pain to speak. And what it says is often surprising. You are not who you thought you were. You are more than this moment. There is something in you that cannot be broken, but you can't hear this voice through noise. You can only hear it when everything else has been stripped away. Trusting the descent, Jung emphasized that the descent into darkness is not a regression. It is a journey into the soul's depths. The myths of the world echo this truth. Inanna descends into the underworld. Orpheus seeks Eurydice in the land of the dead. Christ enters the tomb. These are not stories of failure. They are stories of rebirth. And you too are on such a journey. The silence you are in is not abandonment. It is gestation. Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. Your strength is not measured by how fast you recover, but by your willingness to stay present in the silence, to trust that something is forming in the dark, something wiser, something freer, something more aligned with the truth of who you are. Emerging from the night. Eventually something shifts. The silence softens, a small insight appears, a subtle energy returns. A dream reminds you of your purpose. A moment of beauty pierces through the numbness. You begin to rise, not as who you were, but as someone more whole. This is the quiet miracle Jung pointed to. Not perfection, but integration. You've walked through the fire, you've held your brokenness in silence, and now you emerge with a strength that cannot be taken from you. The world may not see the change at first, but you feel it. You are more grounded, more honest, more alive, because you did not run, you listened. And in that listening, you found yourself. In the silence, something survives. There's a stillness that follows the dark night. It's not empty, it's rich. The noise no longer matters. The world feels different because you are different. You've learned that silence doesn't mean absence, it means presence at its most raw and honest. And from this place you begin again, but not from the ego, from the soul. 7. From stillness to action, living from the grounded self, emerging from the silence of the dark night, something changes. Not in appearance, but in orientation. Where once you reacted, now you respond. Where once you sought control, now you trust. Where once you performed, now you live more truthfully. This is what Carl Jung envisioned as the purpose of inner work, not to retreat from life, but to return to it transformed. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of being. And that light, it begins in silence, but it radiates outward, in our choices, our relationships, our actions. The self as a source of action. When we've spent time in silence, met the shadow, endured the dark night, and connected with our dreams, we no longer act from compulsion. We act from alignment. This is a shift from ego-based doing to soul-based being. Ego says, I must act to be worthy. Self says, I act because I am already whole. This changes everything. Our choices are no longer performative, they're intentional. Our relationships are no longer transactional, they're authentic. Our ambitions are no longer about proving, we seek meaning, not validation. And when life challenges us, we return, not to panic, but to stillness. This is living from the grounded self, conscious doing versus automatic living. Much of modern life is lived on autopilot. We wake, we scroll, we work, we worry. And in that blur, we lose presence. But Jungian thought invites us to live differently, to bring consciousness into everything we do, not by overthinking, but by showing up fully, even in the smallest tasks. Making coffee becomes a ritual of presence. Speaking with a friend becomes a moment of deep listening. Taking a breath before responding becomes a revolutionary act of awareness. This kind of life isn't flashy, but it is powerful because it is grounded, centered, free from the inner fragmentation that once clouded our path. And silence is the foundation. It teaches us to pause, to feel, to wait for the right timing, not to delay action, but to align it. A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. And once you've passed through, you no longer fear action. You move with integrity, the discipline of deliberate speech. One of the most radical forms of action is the choice of words, or the choice to withhold them. In the Jungian path, silence isn't about shutting down expression. It's about purifying it, refining it, making it sacred. When you've lived in inner quiet, you begin to see how often words are wasted, how often we speak from fear, habit, or need for control. But the grounded self speaks from clarity. A single word, when rooted in truth, can shift a relationship. A quiet no can protect your energy. A slow, thoughtful yes can open doors you never saw before. You no longer talk just to fill space. You speak with intention. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Words are animals, alive with a will of their own. Silence trains the tongue. It teaches us that restraint is not repression, it is wisdom. Boundaries, assertiveness, and silent power. Living from the grounded self also means learning to hold boundaries, not in anger, but in presence. You no longer need to shout to be heard. You no longer need to over-explain to justify your existence. When you are rooted in the self, your energy speaks before your voice does. You can say, "This isn't right for me. I need time. I'm choosing differently." And behind those words is the silent strength of someone who knows themselves. This is not passive living. This is active participation in your life, guided by your deepest truth. Silence gave you the map. Now you walk the path with grace, service, creativity, and soul-aligned impact. As you begin to live from stillness, something else unfolds. You stop needing to be the center, and you start asking, how can I serve from this place of groundedness? Jung believed that individuation wasn't about narcissism, it was about contribution. The more whole we become, the more we can give, not from depletion, but from overflow. Whether it's through art, work, parenting, or leadership, your actions now carry a different frequency. You don't chase visibility. You embody truth. You don't demand recognition. You offer presence. This is the essence of the quiet revolutionary, one whose life is transformed by silence and whose presence transforms others in return. Returning to the world, transform now when life gets loud again, and it will. You won't lose yourself in the noise. You will return to the silence, not as escape, but as home. You will remember what it taught you. You will remember who you are. And from that place of inner stillness, you will act with purpose. You will speak with clarity. You will love with depth. And you will walk through the world with the strength of someone who has met themselves and chosen to stay. 8. The practice of inner silence, a lifelong companion. We began this journey with the question, what if learning silence is learning strength? And now, having explored the terrain of Jung's wisdom, the shadow, the self, the dream world, the dark night, and conscious action, we arrive at something both humble and profound. Silence is not a destination. It is a companion. Not something you visit only during crises or meditative retreats, but something you carry within you. Quiet, steady, unwavering. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us. From the darkness he calls us, and in the silence we hear his voice. Carl Jung. This voice is not a stranger. It is the oldest part of you. And learning to be with it, moment by moment, is the beginning of a different kind of life. A life rooted in presence. A life that no longer runs from itself. A life that moves gently but deliberately toward wholeness. Silence as a daily practice. You don't need a mountaintop or monastery to practice inner silence. You need intention and small, sacred pauses. Each day offers 1,000 invitations to return to yourself. A moment before you check your phone. A deep breath before you answer an email. A 5-minute pause before bed to reflect on your inner state. These are not breaks from life. They are life, life lived consciously. Silence is not the absence of thought. It is the space that allows thought to soften so awareness can emerge. Start with small rituals. Sit quietly with your morning tea. Journal a dream fragment without judgment. Walk without music and notice your inner dialogue. Ask yourself gently, what am I avoiding hearing right now? You're not trying to clear the mind. You're learning to listen with your whole being. Holding space for yourself. Jung taught that the psyche is self-healing when we create the right conditions. And one of those conditions is inner stillness. Silence creates a container, a space for your emotions, your confusion, your longings to arise without being judged or rushed. This practice becomes especially important in moments of transition, grief, uncertainty, or growth. In silence, you're not doing something. You're allowing something to happen, something that cannot happen when the mind is constantly occupied. You learn to hold space for yourself, just as you might for a dear friend. You become less reactive, more receptive. You begin to trust your own rhythm, and in that trust, you rediscover your sovereignty. Silence amidst the noise. Even in a noisy world, you can carry silence within you. It's the pause before you speak, the breath you take in tension, the awareness that says, I don't need to engage with this energy. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful, because you're no longer ruled by the external. You choose your responses, you discern what truly matters. This is the quiet confidence Jung pointed to, the strength of someone who has gone inward and come back transformed. You walk into rooms differently, not demanding space, but anchoring it. Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. That harmony begins in silence, and it spreads into your actions, your relationships, your presence. Returning again and again. There will be days when silence feels distant, when the mind races, the heart aches, or the world presses in. That's okay. Silence is not about perfection, it's about returning. Like coming home after a long day. No matter how far you've wandered, the door is always open. Each time you return to that quiet space within, you build trust with yourself. You say, I am here, I'm listening. And over time, this practice becomes a refuge, a wellspring, a place where strength is not performed, but remembered. Sharing silence with others. As you deepen your relationship with silence, something else happens. You begin to hold silence for others. You become someone who listens without interrupting, who sits with discomfort without trying to fix it, who offers presence instead of platitudes. This is a rare gift, and it often heals more than words ever could. In Jungian terms, you become a container, a vessel of calm in which others feel safe to unfold. This kind of silent strength ripples outward. It softens hearts, it inspires truth, it invites others into their own wholeness. And it all begins with the silence you choose to practice each day. The journey continues. Carl Jung didn't give us quick answers or easy affirmations. He gave us a map of the inner world, complex, beautiful, and alive. Silence is the compass on that map. It doesn't point in one direction, it points inward. And when followed, it leads not to escape, but to expansion, not to numbness, but to clarity, not to isolation, but to integration. So let this be your invitation to stop, to listen, to begin again, to let silence walk beside you, not as an absence, but as the truest, kindest strength you'll ever know. Learn to become still, and take your attention away from what you don't want, and place your attention on what you wish to experience. Carl Jung. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are already whole. And in the sacred space of silence, you'll remember. And so, fellow traveler, if this journey through Carl Jung's vision of silence has resonated with you, if it has stirred something deep, familiar, or forgotten, we invite you to return to that quiet space within yourself again and again. Remember, silence is not just where healing begins, it's where your true voice is born. In the stillness, you are not lost, you are becoming. And every moment you choose to listen inward is an act of radical strength in a noisy world. Thank you for walking this path with us. This is Galactic Wisdom, where we explore the inner cosmos with reverence, courage, and heart. If you felt something shift today, if a truth landed softly, or if silence began to feel like home, please like, share, and subscribe to support more soul-deep content like this. Drop a comment below and tell us, what role does silence play in your life? Or simply share a word that this video awakened in you. Until next time, be gentle, be still, And remember, your quiet is powerful. Subscribe to Galactic Wisdom. Thank you for being here. Your presence matters.